Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Alkemi Labs. I'm Bradley Harland, and today we're diving into the evolving world of IT with someone who knows the trenches and strategy boardroom equally well. My guest is Riaan Lombard, who is from IP Dimension, a company that's making waves in turning IT from a reactive support function into a strategic business advantage. Their motto is "We make IT work," and we're going to unpack what that really means. Riaan, welcome to the show. Great to have you with us.
Brilliant. Thank you, Bradley, and thank you for this opportunity. I appreciate that, and I hope that I can share some insights.
I'm sure you will. Look, let's maybe start from the beginning. What was the original mission of IP Dimension when it was launched, and how's that shifted over time?
Yeah, Bradley, so that delves into the history of IP Dimension quite a bit, So it started off two shareholders who's still shareholders today. They had a passion for IT, and the passion was more hardware related. So a family friend needed equipment, and they saw that there was a need for an equipment provider within their direct community. And then they established IP Dimension, So I think the first product they sold was a robotics modem that was used for internet connectivity. And it just evolved from there, morphed from a hardware provider to where we are today.
It has been a shift in the way that IP Dimension operates, and I think a big part of that is this idea of moving away from being these almost classic IT fixes and sort of what you see as that stereotype to being something where you've become more of a proactive advisory partner. You want to maybe talk us through that move and how that happened and what that
Yeah.
actually means?
Yeah, absolutely, Bradley. So, back in the day, you knew an IT guy, right? The neighbor's son studied IT, so they fixed all the computer issues. And so the whole paradigm shift moved away from being reactive, as you mentioned, into a problem fixing after it happened. And it's IT, in essence, has become the overarching theme within organizations for strategic planning within the technical scope of that environment. I think to that point, when companies make strategic decisions or when they roll out a new product or a new service within the environment, IT is probably one of their first contacts, if not the first contact, in assisting in making that decision and gathering the necessary data to determine whether this product is going to be market fit, whether it's going to be client fit, whether it's going to add value to the existing organization and add value to their customer base. So it's really morphed from being I'd like to call it the neighbor's son scenario, to where you're now in advisory capacity, where you are actively becoming part of the strategic roadmap for your clients. And you need to serve on exco committees and make sure that all the buying personas within the organization understand what it is, what's going on within that product scope or within the product offering that's being presented.
What does it look like in a day, or at least from on a day-to-day basis? Like, what does it mean in terms of the kind of support that you give? Can you unpack a little bit more of what that actually means?
Yeah, of course. First off, the We Make IT Work. I'm so glad that you got the IT part of it. The slogan came from, I think, 2009. And the only reason we used it was because simpler, better, faster was already taken. But no, so coming back to that is we found that so many business owners were focused on getting their IT systems to work to support their business, where it reached a point where they could not focus on their passion. They couldn't focus on the initial inception of the business and why the inception of the business was there. So our slogan was built around, you should stop as a business owner focusing on IT problems, allow IP Dimension to look after your IT infrastructure. Let's make IT work within your organization to become an active participating member within your organization. That would give you the competitive advantage. Now, there's really been a paradigm shift in the support structures. You asked, how does a typical day look? Or, how does a support structure in an IT MSP look? What we see now is monitoring. There's a magnitude of data being fed to any MSP, not just IP Dimension, but any MSP that does monitoring and reporting on existing clients. where you're in such a competitive market that you can't afford downtime anymore, right? But the intricacies behind IT support systems and IT infrastructures within clients does not allow the general IT person, the neighbor's friend or neighbor's son, to proactively monitor devices anymore. So you need systems, remote monitoring and management systems and process and service automation systems to monitor those devices and to inform you. So what they basically do is trend analysis, if I can call it that, on where performance barriers and performance bottlenecks are within your organization. Now, the PSA systems can address those issues to a certain extent, but you as an IT support person and an IT support company need to interact with that system and then provide solutions to the problems. We've seen in so many cases that automation could quickly fix a problem, but only to a certain extent where that problem keeps recurring, but the user doesn't pick it up because it's automatically fixed in the back end. But the source or the root of the problem isn't addressed. So you really need to become smart, and that's part of where IP dimension fits in, is to analyze these trends, to get the right reporting from the tools to show you where the originating problems are and to resolve those.
If we had to talk about scale, a lot of businesses owners hit this sort of messy middle. You've got traction, but growth starts becoming a little bit tricky. What was that like for IP Dimension in terms of your growth and how you managed to unlock some of it?
Yeah, scaling. Look, so we've definitely got economies of scope, right? So I've got access to a multitude of products and services that's available to our customer base. And scaling the business, the emphasis within the IT industry was doing more with less. So in essence, you needed to scale down, but your service offerings and your product offerings needed to scale up. Now, luckily, we're in an SME, small, medium enterprise business, which affords us great agility within the market. And when agility is juxtaposed against corporate bureaucracy, I can guarantee you 100% of the time the SME is going to make the quicker decision, right? And that's what allowed us to scale to such an extent where we could onboard larger clients with a smaller staff component and with the addition of automation systems and remote monitoring systems, which empowered us. It gave us the tools and the insights to now do more with less, which was perfect in the scaling environment.
In our pre-conversation, you spoke about the Porter's 5 forces. So applying that when it comes to sort of rethinking your strategy is quite an important thing to do. Maybe just explain that for the listeners in terms of exactly what that means, number one, but then what was the biggest shift that came from that exercise of doing?
Sure. Yeah, Bradley. So many companies are stuck with a SWOT analysis, right? Strength, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. I personally believe that you can't perform a SWOT analysis on yourself. You need insights from your customers, you need insights from public, you need insights from industry. It sounds so academic, but Michael Porter, the grandfather of business strategy and alignment, he's got the 5 forces model, which we used as a SWOT analysis with building and forming our strategy. And in essence, what that meant is I needed to go outside IP Dimension's walls. I needed to go to our suppliers. I needed to go to our customers and interview them and ask them, what is it that we're doing right? What is it that we're doing wrong? Very interesting is barriers to entry, which is one of Porter's 5 forces. Within the IT space in South Africa, just to give you an idea, an overview, I went to speak to some of our upstream providers, and year on year, we've seen a 20% growth in the amount of new resellers registering to become hardware and software resellers in South Africa. Now, 20% doesn't sound that much, but when you work that back to the actual figure, that's 1,200 people for the last financial year and 1,000 people, or around about 1,000, I think it was 1,060 new resellers the year before that. Now, I don't know about you, but that screams like there's very low to little barriers to entry within the IT space. So we needed to go and investigate as to what is it that we're focusing on. Am I in hardware sales? Who am I competing against? I'm competing against about 1,200 new entrants into the market that also wants to sell hardware. I'm competing against the big leagues like the Takealots and the Macro and anybody with an online store that can drop their pricing at any stage. And to that point, I'd like to challenge any MSP to try and compete on price on a Black Friday or some Cyber Monday weekend, right? It's impossible. It's a race to the bottom if you're trying to compete in price. So to get that insight into the business and to build that strategy, we had to go and look at those 5 forces and look at see what is it that our competitors are doing, what are the barriers to entry, so I had to go and revisit those, and it's it's like introspection, but just for the company. And it's very eye-opening once you sit down and you look at what's actually happening in the market.
You've spoken about how you've applied the Porter's 5 forces and what that means and how it's actually been a great influence for you. But how have you found your voice in that? So what have been some of the tricks that have worked very well for IP Dimension to get you to where you are today?
Sure. I'm going to bring that back to agility, and also to this one little sentence that says you can't be everything to everyone. It's very, very important to understand that the ICT industry have changed. In a previous scenario, a previous decade, if I can call it, you had full control over the entire IT environment. That ecosystem belonged to you. You could focus on all of the areas, the encompassing ecosystem in IT, where now that's changed. You now need to find your niche within that product scope. And there's nothing that prevents you to still take ownership of the ecosystem within the customer environment. But again, you can't be everything to everyone. So if you've got cybersecurity specialists, that is going to be the best for your customer if you are not the cybersecurity specialist. Marketing, it's extremely difficult if you don't have a marketing degree and you don't have active experience in marketing organizations. Then you're kind of moving backwards. So the outsourcing model it makes much more sense these days to outsource niche and specific functions within the business to the product specialists within those areas. Now, where IP Dimension found its voice within this is the liaison, being the company and the person or the advisor that can speak all the different languages on all the different platforms. So I might not be a marketing expert, but I've got great insights into the business. I know exactly what the strategy of the customer is. I know exactly where they want to move. And an added advantage to me is I built the IT infrastructure for that company. So I know exactly how to position it to work with the third-party providers, whether that be cyber insurance or marketing or whatever the case may be. So in that, being agile within the customer environment, I think that's where the niche is.
What do you think in your world are the biggest fears that clients have about this idea of actually switching providers? How do you reduce that friction, like in terms of that fear that they might?
So in my opinion, two very pertinent points that stand out. This is point number one, downtime. We have to focus on operational resilience in this economic state that we're in currently. So you can't afford downtime. You can't afford for your customers to wait. The moment there's a bottleneck, people start looking for other providers. And it's hard enough to do business in South Africa as is. If you don't have a niche product or a niche service, it's really tough to keep your existing client base happy because, again, of the very low barriers to entry. The next person is in line that's ready and willing to assist, right? So point number one is downtime. They can't afford. And point number two is intellectual property, right? So we've seen in many cases before, people don't want to shift because they are worried that this domain is managed now by another provider, or the email account sits in another provider's cloud or another provider's platform, or in essence, if they now decide to fire this provider, what are they going to do? Are they going to hold them ransom? Will systems stop working? Luckily, there are workarounds around that. And so they don't need to worry about that anymore because you've got upstream providers and partnerships. And so IP Dimension has been in business for going on 28 years now. And we've been Microsoft partners, from very early stages. So just thinking about the Microsoft environment, your Azure hosted servers or your email infrastructure that sits in cloud that's managed by another provider, you've got relationships with upstream providers that can intervene and say, well, listen, you need to move over to the new service provider, or Microsoft takes it over on behalf of the service provider. But those barriers are now removed to a very large extent. I'm not saying that all barriers are removed. Look, if there's custom software being built or custom development that's been done specific to a company, that might be a bit bigger challenge. But when there is a third-party provider, an upstream provider involved, it becomes much easier.
So how do you ensure that clients actually understand what you're offering, actually understand what you do and how that adds value to their lives?
Need to keep it simple, Bradley. So look, you need to, point number one, understand what it is that you're selling, right? What is your service? What is your value add? What is it that you're providing to the market? And then I've got this rule that says you need to be able to explain it to a 10-year-old. And by that, with all due respect, I'm not saying that the mindset level of our customers are at 10-year-old level, but if a 10-year-old doesn't understand it, chances are that a very busy CEO is not going to understand it either. They don't have time to try and decipher what it is that you do. It needs to be plain, straightforward, simple. I always want to say it needs to be a one-liner, but these days you can't put it in a one-liner. But it needs to be simple. It needs to be understandable. And it's extremely important, first of all, for you as the provider of the service to understand what it is that you do. If you don't understand what it is that you do, your customer's not going to understand what it is that you do.
And I mean, why do you believe that this level of simplification is so powerful at building trust?
Very good question. So I did a talk a while ago about the different personas in the buying centers of organizations. And, so the same reason why your salespeople need to have financial acumen when selling a service or a product to your prospective client. So that same principle applies to CEOs. They've got a certain amount of understanding of what happens within the IT industry. But I have to now, again, with all due respect, say the technology space have evolved at such a rapid pace that many CEOs and CEOs could not keep up with it. And again, it's not their focus, so it's not expected of them to keep up with it. But if I now come with IT jargon to a prospective client, I can talk about socks and seams and SASE and whatever. But if they don't understand the acronym point number one and don't understand what the service is, I've lost them. So in order for me to add value, I need to bring it to a level that's human, that can be understood. If I need to explain what DMARC records is, certain cybersecurity terms, is that level of trust when somebody understands what's going to happen, point number one, within my organization, what is the risk that I'm facing, what is the downtime that I'm facing, what would be the effect after the installation or the implementation, then you've got their attention.
Yeah, I echo that. Like, actually, funny enough, a couple of years back, I was dealing with a client in the renewable energy space, and then we had a very frank conversation about exactly the same thing. They were going into these meetings with these big, corporates and retailers saying, you need to kind of look at renewable energy solutions, but they were doing it in a very technical way as engineers. And the people sitting behind the desk were CEOs or mall property managers, etc. All they wanted to know is this going to reduce downtime? Is this going to ensure that I actually save some money? And it was about finding ways that it actually translates into language that they understand. And so I think it is a really important thing that a lot of people often miss in business, is this idea that you're not the smartest person in the room when you're using the most verbose and hyperbolic language to tell your story, because then people won't get it.
I couldn't agree with you more, Bradley. It's often the reason why you need to sell 4, 5, 6 times over, because the same product or the same service has a different meaning to different people within the organization. Exactly. And that was what the talk about personas was about, is when I'm in the room with the CEO, she needs to see forecast over year 1, year 2, year 3. She doesn't care about what the impact is on the end user at the end of the day. Is how is it going to affect my bottom line? How is it going to affect my strategy? And how am I going to plan or forecast for the years coming forward? Now, so it's a completely different conversation. And again, I can look really smart, but if I don't have that trust relationship, if I don't get that buy-in into, hey, I'm human, you're human, we're talking about the same thing here, then you might as well just leave it.
We've spoken about the idea of segmentation based on the audience persona, which I think is really, really important to do. Know who you're talking to and talk
Mm.
a language that they understand. But then it also goes to the layer of marketing channels. Like, what do you believe in your world has worked for you and what's been a waste of time?
We've tried a lot. It's, I think, you need to have omnipresence, right? So there needs to be some sort of marketing on all different channels where your potential clients could be. Now, what we've seen in the past is if we give something away, we advertise that on Facebook. Massive interaction. People love freebies. If I promote that same prize or product on LinkedIn, it's kind of dead. You don't get much feedback, right? So audience specific definitely is. And it comes back to your buying personas. Who are you selling to, right? Who is your ideal client? Understand who that person is, and then target that specific person where they are. We've seen, for instance, when we post on social media, LinkedIn, throughout the day, not a lot of interaction. But after hours, between the hours of maybe 8 to about 10 o'clock in the evenings, a lot more interaction, a lot more organic growth, a lot more of, posts being boosted and getting a lot more traction. Radio, we've tried radio as well, but I think radio needs to be accompanied by social media. It needs to be accompanied by printed media so that when people hear about you on the radio, they need to associate that with a logo that they've seen somewhere or read about somewhere. Right? So with that being said, we've tried vehicle branding, we've tried digital print, billboards, radio ads, television. We've been on a breakfast program on CakeNet. So there's been several avenues, but I don't think that we've ever tried all of them together as we are at this stage. So that omnipresence, I think, is extremely important.
How do you think about brand building when results take time? What are your thoughts around that in terms of the importance of brand building? You touched on from an omnipresence point of view.
Yeah,
What are
let's
your
say
views?
pipeline takes a while, right? So, and the bad thing is, and there's many marketers that would argue with me here, but it's extremely difficult to measure ROI on a billboard.
Mm-hmm.
It's really difficult to see how many people scanned or how many people interacted on the billboard. However, I think it's the long game, right? So we, especially with the omnipresence thing, I think, well, we're now in the process, I think we're now 6 months down the line, and we're definitely seeing a change within the interactions on almost sorry to say this, but our cold calling as well, because cold calling is not dead, believe it or not. But when you now make a telephone call to a client that you've identified, and again, a cold lead needs to be turned into a hot lead before you phone, so that you know who you're interacting with. But now we're seeing that when you phone a client or prospective client, that client kind of brings the logo back, says, I've heard about you somewhere, or yeah, I've seen you guys in the area, or, so having that omnipresence means I now have something that backs me. Whereas 10 years ago, when I only focused on cold calling or when I only focused on Facebook marketing, it was a standalone kind of approach. So people didn't know who you are. But now with more exposure on different platforms, it just builds that credibility, point number one, and it builds familiarity, which is extremely important to us.
Riaan, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for pulling back the curtain on how you're building a smarter, sharper, more human-centered IT business. Where can people connect with you if they want to learn more?
Yeah, so on LinkedIn, I'm very active on LinkedIn. People are welcome to search for me on LinkedIn. Riaan Lombard. You'll see the guy with the bless. That's my LinkedIn profile. And then on email as well. So you're welcome to email me at riaanl@ipdimension.net. So connect with me via email, via LinkedIn. I'm more than happy to connect. And what I really love is to have these type of business discussions with clients. I've seen my own career transforming a lot from just being the IT support person to being the business advisor, learning about people's challenges. And I think the advantage that I've got is through the last 18 years with IP Dimension, I've had so much exposure to different industries within South Africa that I know if something works for one industry, it might be applicable to another industry, or understanding industry challenges and then working towards a solution and sharing those with people. So I'm more than happy to learn from others. I'm more than happy to discuss roadmaps and just brainstorm around ideas on how to attack a very difficult economy.
Well, thanks again. And to our listeners, catch you next time on Alkemi Labs.